Great. Well, thank you all for sticking it out with us. My name is Diana Greenwald. I'm the Associate Curator of American Art at the Portland Museum of Art in Maine. Doing this panel along with my co-chair, Jennifer Olivares. And I'm going to let our distinguished panelists, Scott and Pam, introduce themselves as they present. Just wanted to say, too, that bringing this panel together, Jennifer and I actually had two fairly different ideas about what we wanted to present on, but at the heart of each of them was this notion that our permanent collections could really be fascinating ways to diversify and increase our audience and our engagement and access. So you'll see throughout these case studies, these are all kind of instances where we've looked at permanent collections, both small scale and large scale, and found ways that we can use them and leverage them to find new audiences and to increase the types of publics that we bring to our institutions. So just to briefly introduce you to my institution, the Portland Museum of Art is located in downtown Portland. We are three structures bound together in the center of the city. It's a city of about 66,000 with a metro area of about 250,000. We have an average visitorship of about 150,000 a year. We're about 18,000 objects strong. And we have, as I said, a major campus downtown, as well as a satellite campus with the Winslow Homer Studio that the museum began offering tours of in 2012. So we have a real strength in Winslow Homer particularly, as well as American and European art of the 19th and 20th centuries. And in 2013, I can say this because I was not there yet, we had a young, ambitious, but slightly, I think, naive about the amount of work it was going to take staff at the museum. We were fresh off of a campaign to open the Winslow Homer Studio, and we were looking at sort of what the next focus for the museum could be. And our director and our curators came together and realized that what we really wanted to do was focus on the permanent collection and really finding ways to bring that collection out to our audiences in a new and fresh way. Because of the focus on the Homer Studio, we hadn't really paid attention to our permanent collection galleries, which had gotten a little bit stale. So we took the opportunity in 2013 to really think kind of broadly about ways that we could put the collection, the permanent collection, really at the foundation of the way that we were thinking about the museum and to make that a real prerogative. So we came up with a project that became known as Your Museum Reimagined, or YMR for short. And this project ended up being essentially a 5-year initiative from beginning of conception to our final opening of the second installment of it in February 2017. And we ended up breaking the project up into two major parts. So the first part of the project was both to get our audiences involved really with the breadth of our collection, so finding out how wide and vast our collections were, but then also to be able to delve very deeply into specific objects into the collection. So what this involved for us was getting the collection online on our website for the very first time. So we put our collections database, warts and all, up on our website and made the collections accessible really to everyone, anywhere, anytime. Simultaneously, and this was important for us, we also published our first ever collections catalog, which allowed our visitors to delve deep into particular objects that we'd selected as being particularly important or significant. The third prong of this first phase of YMR was also the opening of an art study room. So what this meant was that visitors who'd seen an object on our collections database could come into the museum, request it, and see it with a staff member really at any moment. And that's been a real significant boon for us too, with audiences, teachers and university students particularly in our region, places like the Maine College of Art, Bowdoin, Bates, and Colby. We've had great responses from teachers who are using us as a curricular tool. So the main kind of second portion, this all happened, we debuted those three facets of YMR in 2016. The major second facet was the complete reinstallation of every gallery in those three major buildings in downtown Portland. And what this enabled us to do as a young curatorial staff was to really take a focused look at the types of objects that we had on view and to be able to conceptualize them in new ways, but also to look at a lot of the stuff that hadn't seen the light of day in a long time. So we were able to bring out objects like Bernard Langley's Samoset Fountain that you can see over on the left in this image. We've actually managed to get 20% more objects out into our galleries as of the reinstallation completion, which is certainly one of the stated goals. It also enabled us as a curatorial team to have a lot of interesting discussions about how we wanted these galleries to kind of look and feel, whether we wanted them to be purely chronological, whether we wanted them to have some moments of thematic breakout. And it enabled us at the very beginning of these discussions to really establish some grounding principles that we wanted throughout the galleries. So a couple of the kind of major themes and projects for every single gallery that we reinstalled were to bring the decorative arts out in a much more holistic way throughout the galleries. Also to have our American and European art, which had formerly been pretty sequestered, talking to each other in new and different ways in many instances throughout the galleries. And also, as I said, to have art that had been formerly in one place that our visitors had been accustomed to seeing in one context, recontextualized in new ways. So you'll see here the Dead Pearl Diver by Benjamin Paul Akers that, judging from the number of cobwebs that we saw when we moved him, hadn't been moved in quite a long time, but reconceptualized in a room about 19th century American landscape. And again, to get objects that hadn't been seen in a long time out, kind of onto view for visitors to see. So this idea about integrating decorative arts, paintings, and sculpture has really come to fruition in a lot of our gallery spaces, and I'll show you just a few of them. One is our Home and Away gallery, where we talk about early colonial and federal American objects, and it's an opportunity for us to bring out things like our formal portraiture, but also things like painted fire screens and beautiful early colonial silver. Other places like our Cosmopolitans gallery provide that same opportunity to mix painting and sculpture with decorative arts, but also to talk about transatlantic exchange and to bring to the fore ideas that artists and patrons are thinking and working across the Atlantic in really comprehensive ways in the Gilded Age. So objects here, everything from Renoir to Tiffany to John Singer Sargent. So I will say the other thing that we did into these galleries too was to integrate interactive kiosks into 5 of our different spaces to provide different opportunities for new and varied audiences to get types of information that we found that we couldn't provide in simple label text. We also included a new audio guide for every one of these galleries, and the audio guide was deliberately much less didactic than it had ever been in the past, much more conversational between curators, and also much more inclusive of members of the community. So we had local artists, local art historians also within the galleries talking about objects. And the response has been pretty overwhelmingly positive. We've had, at this point, we reopened the new galleries in February 2017, and have had enough metrics to say that our attendance is up, ticket sales are up, membership is up. And for us at least, anecdotally, one of the kind of nicest metrics for us was seeing on a very, very cold evening in February in 2017 when we reopened these galleries, seeing 2,700 people stream through the doors, which if any of you have been to Maine in February, you know is quite a feat for us. So that, at least for the curators, was an opportunity for us to see that our public was excited about this, and we've continued to see that excitement kind of permeate these spaces. So I'll leave it with that and hope to speak a little bit more about some of these things in the Q&A. Okay.
Thanks, Diana. Thanks, everybody, for staying. We appreciate it. I'm Jennifer Komar Olivares, Head of Exhibition Planning and Strategy at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. And I was a curator in Minneapolis and still have some curatorial duties, but I've worked with our period rooms for 25 years, and so I'm using our period room projects as a kind of smaller subject for this panel. So like many American museums, we have period rooms. We have continued to collect them. We started actually collecting them and displaying them in 1919. We have 17 period rooms, including 12 Western period rooms, 4 Asian period rooms, a contemporary installation that looks like a period room, which I'll show you, and 1 historic house museum, which is a prairie school house, the Purcell Cutts house. You see the bottom left. This first kind of core group was really about showing the progression of style, the kind of art history chronology within the museum. And there wasn't a whole lot of focus on historical accuracy, as those of you who know how period rooms were traded and sold at this time would understand that. And as a result, also, we don't know a lot about who these rooms belong to in some cases, but also they've tended to remain fairly static. However, we've had, over the years, holiday decorations. I see Catherine's in the mezzanine, who, when she worked at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, we spent a lot of time decorating for Christmas, which, that's not us on the 2 left slides. That's kind of from the, less historically accurate displays. We tried to do some more historically accurate displays that you see on the right. This kind of became anachronistic for us over the years, and we were really looking for ways to do more meaningful work in these period rooms, shall I say. We also, at the same time, had a new curator of contemporary art for the first time, which was Liz Armstrong, who's now at Palm Springs, and she brought in Mark Dion to do an installation for her exhibition, More Real, Art in the Age of Truthiness, and he was inspired by our period rooms and actually created what is now kind of interpreted, excuse me, as a period room, which is the curator's office, which is a sort of fictional recreation of our first curator of modern and contemporary art who disappeared under mysterious circumstances in the 1950s, and his walled-up office was revealed in 2013. He wrote up a big, long narrative that I thought nobody would ever read, and they do, and they believe it, although this is a fiction. So all of these ideas kind of helped us really think about how we could insert narrative in our period rooms, because that's really what we found was missing, that our visitors wanted to insert narrative in these rooms around the objects that were in them, and many times, especially with the older rooms, those things did not coincide. I mean, there was really not much information we had about those rooms. They were really only about style, as I said. So around this time, we decided to start our living rooms period room initiative, and we've done a number of smaller scale projects. It's kind of an area for us to experiment. So we've done some very low-cost installations, but also some larger scale ones, and I'll talk about one of them. Let's see. This one actually, I do want to mention, because this one was done on a small budget with a local lender and scholar on Jane Austen. And so we took our 2 English period rooms and took out all the furnishings that hadn't changed much over the many decades and installed one room as a Jane Austen reading room with Emma, which it was to celebrate the 200th anniversary of the publication of Emma, and also books inspired by Emma. And then the room that was contiguous with it, we installed as a scene from Emma with props and the books marked. And people really enjoyed this, because it was, not only could you sit in a period room, which you couldn't before, but it was actually tied to narratives that were related to fiction that people were familiar with. And we have a local Jane Austen Society as well. But the one that I want to focus on is this Many Voices of Colonial America. We did get an NEA Artworks grant for 3 sets of rooms, three particular projects, but this one really deals with bringing out voices that reinserting the presence of African and Native Americans in 2 rooms from Charleston, South Carolina. So we had, you can kind of see this very small image. For decades, we've had these 2 rooms from Charleston installed to represent colonial interiors and decorative arts of the 18th century. And so those had never substantially changed. So this is really quite a big shakeup. So what we've done, and these only opened a couple of weeks ago, and so we haven't measured them yet at this point, but what we've done with the Charleston Drawing Room is the original owner of this house was John Stewart, who's the superintendent for Indian Affairs for the British Crown. And so he worked very closely with the Cherokee Indians as well as other tribes in the area. He was a diplomat. He also had a relationship with Native Americans, including descendants. And so we've brought in objects I'll show you, but we also brought in a voice from our community that we found, Beverly Bushyhead, who is a member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee, who lives in our community and coincidentally has traced her lineage to John Stewart. And so it was this really interesting coincidence where we could kind of have her as a living portrait. And I don't know if you can tell, but over the fireplace, she's sort of hanging there. We always envision this kind of talking portrait, kind of moving portrait like in Harry Potter. That's
the thing that it means to me is, as I thought about this room and this man, it really brought my culture alive for me, and it made me think, what was he going through at the same time? What were my people going through? I know that it's a hard and harsh land. It is very clear to me that his relationships with the tribes would have been positive because they would have welcomed and been helpful around survival in the mountains. And I think that much of his relationship would have been open and happy relations with those different tribes. And the fact that he married a Cherokee woman and had children with her makes me believe that there was some truth that happened between them that is now just part of history.
So she kind of welcomes you into the room, and she also introduces the artists. We have historical native objects from Cherokee collections, which we borrowed mainly because we don't have that strength in our collection, but we also juxtapose them with works from contemporary Cherokee artists that directly relate to historical events in Cherokee history in the colonies. And so, for example, we have this powder horn depicting the Congress in 1765 at Fort Piccolata, which includes the only known, as far as we know, portrait of John Stewart with the tricorner hat. And then we also have Shan Gosshorn's portraits referencing this Cherokee delegation that went to England, and they lost their interpreter along the way, and so they spoke their own language, but they were treated as the warriors they were. And a piece also that she made, so she's chosen contemporary Cherokee to depict here, but to reference that historical event, and then also a basket that also refers to this. And as well, we have a historic object, a deerskin coat from the Minnesota Historical Society that's of Cherokee origin, and juxtaposed with a turkey feather cape that is a ceremonial object made by the Cherokee artist Lisa Rutherford. So we have them on audio interviews talking about their objects within that room. And then in the dining room, so these two rooms right now are contiguous. They weren't in the original building, but we're addressing the issues of African and African-American history because John Stewart also had a plantation. He did have enslaved Africans. They came from West Africa because of their knowledge of rice cultivation and because that was something that was very important to the economy of Charleston at that time. So we did do a little bit of focus group work as we were planning these, and we did find out that in our communities, and we do have African and African-American communities, is that they didn't want their objects to be sort of randomly inserted within these rooms, but they also wanted us to really focus on the more cultural aspects of what was going on. So we focused on the rice cultivation story. So we have objects from, again, historical objects juxtaposed with contemporary objects. So you can see like a rice fanner basket from the American Museum of Natural History that could either be from South Carolina or from Senegal, because the cultural traditions were so fluid at that time in the 18th century. And then we found Henrietta Snipe. I don't know if any of you know her, but she's a wonderful basket maker from South Carolina who made us a large fanner basket that we have installed in the room as well. And as part of this narrative, we have audio interviews with Henrietta Snipe, as well as Pierre Thiam, who's a Senegalese chef here in New York. But we have it narrated by Jonathan Rose, who is was born in West Africa and lives in our community. So he's speaking about these traditions in this particular room. So we were very pleased. He was somebody that we had worked with before in our African community. But just also, I have this last slide because we have other examples where we've been doing this type of thing and bringing in artists to really work more with diversity within our own collection and kind of hand over a little bit of the authority. So we worked with Andrea Carlson for the Let project, which you see on the left slide. She is a native artist from Minnesota and was interested in bringing in her constituents to provide labels and interpretation that challenged the authority of the labels that we write for our objects. So they chose objects within our collection, and also to kind of challenge the collection and authority that museums have had over the years. So they made reproductions of objects within the collection and had a ceremonial burial of these objects across the street, and that was filmed, and the film was shown. It's also shown in our Native American galleries now. And then on the right, it's kind of hard to see, but the Propeller Group was mentioned earlier today. We acquired their work, The Dead Need Light, The Living Need Music, and that is juxtaposed with historic objects from our collection that follow the theme of that time-based media piece that deals with funerary practices in Vietnam, but the objects that were chosen by the Propeller Group Collective were about funerary practices all over the world. And so we've been able to install them kind of in dialogue with each other, and it's been a really rewarding experience. It looks fantastic in our photography galleries. So we're looking for ways to do this in different areas of the collection. So that's my last slide. I'll hand it over.
I guess I'm not last. I'm Scott Urbis. I'm curator of decorative arts and design at the Speed Art Museum, and we underwent a complete reinstallation of our collection during a time when I was chief curator, during an expansion project that we shut down from 2012 until March of 2016. And during that time, we really wanted to rethink who we were as an institution. The idea that there's no such thing as an underserved audience. It's just an unwelcomed audience or audiences. So the reinstallation of the collection, which was geared towards making us a little more user-friendly, was part of a larger package. Rethinking what our engagement team was doing, rebranding ourselves, focusing on increasing diversity within our board, and a number of other efforts as well. And as I said, this was done during an expansion, and that created some unique circumstances for us. For a while there, it was myself and one other curator. We were fully staffed up with only about 12 months before we began to reinstall the collection. I wouldn't recommend that to anyone necessarily, but I will say that it really pushed us to be flexible. It pushed us to be creative. It pushed us to go from idea to design to execution very quickly. I think it kept me, I don't know if this is a curatorial trait, kept me from overthinking and kind of wondering, were we doing the right thing? But I think the results were guided by a few touchstones. The first was we really wanted to break away from a long-time tradition of a completely chronological installation at the Speed. And as we thought about that, you know, the one directed to ourselves, because we are a smaller institution with a very episodic collection, was to think about where the different parts of the collection wanted to take us, rather than for us to say, let's do everything thematic, or, you know, pick your poison, but really to let the different parts of the collection tell us where we should go with them. So that led to a mix of installations that are thematic, installations that focus on geography or geographic identity, and I'll touch on that in a minute. And also opportunities where we could combine works from different parts of the collection together in a meaningful and coherent way. A second touchstone for us was to think about how we're presenting the collection to our visitors and really focusing on ways to give them ways of looking. One of the things that I'm sure we all encounter, and I'll touch on this again in a minute, is this sense of confusion amongst visitors. What do I do? How do I look? What am I supposed to do? And through a program that we launched while we were closed called Art Detectives, it's a program that takes works of art into the schools, and also we were using with adult groups as well, that focuses on active looking, focuses on collaborative looking, and focuses on creative response to what you're seeing. And that proved to be very successful. The feedback we were getting, not just from teachers where we were taking this to classrooms, but from adult groups we were using it with, really said to us that this was something that we wanted to continue to do in the galleries. And we also looked to both existing research we had done, focus group research we'd done, and new research, in this case focused around our rebranding and what we were as an institution. And a couple of things that came out of that consistently was an idea that, visitors, these were not necessarily people who had been to the museum. These were inclined visitors across all demographic categories, telling us that they wanted to feel personally engaged with not just what they were seeing, but with the institution as a whole. And the second, and certainly not surprising, we all hear this, again, this sense of anxiety over what do I do when I come into the museum? How do I look at what you're showing me? And even more importantly for us, because we have a large contingent of people who come with children, how do I collaborate with my children? So frankly, the comments we heard, so I don't look stupid. And again, that really reinforced to us ways we should think about the collection and this mix of approaches that we took. And I'll just show a couple of examples. This is one of the galleries that makes the transition between our new building and our existing 1927 Beaux-Arts building. And we use this space, in one sense, to present a cross-section of the whole collection. But more importantly, we divided it up into sections to really focus on ways of looking. So it's divided up into how you think about function, how you think about technique, how you think about the backstory or the context that these things are coming out of, and then the completely subjective idea of, what's your response to what you're seeing? I've always been a great believer that if someone loves something, that's great. If they hate something, that's great. At least they're responding to what they're seeing, and we wanted them to feel empowered that that's okay, that that's what you should be doing when you visit us. Another space that we launched as part of our renovation was a new space devoted to the art of Kentucky and its artistic heritage. 73% of our visitors, we're the only encyclopedic art museum in the state of Kentucky. 73% of our visitors are from Kentucky. And so when we were thinking about this space and thinking about the conversations that we were having with collectors and with patrons, was this strong sense, and I'm a Yankee, so this was new to me, this strong sense of geographic identity, how people think about themselves in relation to where they live, the counties or the regions that they came from or their families came from. The question you often hear is, where are your people from? And so we divided the space geographically and called it out using maps throughout the gallery so that it gives visitors a chance to walk into this space and look at the dialogue between different regions, and there are these very strong regional and even county-wide divisions, particularly in the antebellum period. But also, where's your home place? What objects were coming out of that context? And this spread over into our interpretive strategy, too. We took these ideas in that first gallery I showed, these different ways of looking, and we carried these throughout the galleries in our labeling and our text panels. Not for every single object, that would have been insane, but for selective objects, and really focusing on how you can engage with specifically what you're seeing in the object. You'll see a lot less biography about artists, in most of our galleries, not all of them, but really more exactly what you're seeing and what that can tell you about the object. We've started to do just some. We've been open for a year. It feels like we've been open for 2 months. But we're starting to do some evaluation, and I think this whole package, not just of what we are doing, but what our engagement team is doing, what our marketing team is doing, spending money on marketing the permanent collection, yay, is really led to a strong community response. Our attendance is way up, which is great. But when we look at the metrics of who's coming, we're finding that our attendance matches the ethnic makeup of our metropolitan area. And that's just the beginning. I think we can do more. Our engagement team does an amazing job partnering with organizations like Kentucky Refugee Ministries, with groups that serve people with learning disabilities, and doing art-making activities with them that relate to the permanent collection. They then bring their work into the museum. We have a gallery set aside for them to display their work. That gets them, and in the case of kids, their parents, into the museum, and then they can experience the whole thing at their own speed, as we like to say. So I think we have a ways to go. I think we're working on a strategic plan. The big thing for us is constant and consistent evaluation. How to try to do that with a small staff. I'd love recommendations from anybody out there. I mean, that's tough. We're all stretched really thin. But I think that that's a really important part of how we can begin to build on what we've already done.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm the last of the last of the last. But thank you for hanging in, and I'm going to take you to the far left corner of the country, to Seattle. I'm Pam Mackey. I'm the curator of African and Oceanic art there, and I want to talk to you about a strategy for trying to get attention and new ideas for your permanent collection by having a special exhibition. And the special exhibition that we did was called Disguised Masks in Global African Art, and it came here, and Kevin helped us install it and reconfigured it here, but it was a chance to take on what I think is a chronic issue. Seattle has a great African art collection, but how many people have direct experience with Africa, with Africans? And in that space, without that direct connection, there's a lot of time for fantasies and stereotypes to evolve. So I worked with a consultant curator, Erica Dalia-Masakwe, and we went out and we asked artists to help us take on especially the fantasies about masking and disguise. We commissioned 8 artists. One of them was Wura Natasha Agunji, who you see here. She did an entire project that was in the exhibition. She came to Seattle, as did many of the artists for the opening, and did public talks, collaborated with the staff on a few things, and then she said, I'm going to do a Kissing the Mask action. And we didn't know about this, and then she just said, and I'm going to do it in the European galleries. And so you see what happens. The European galleries were set on high alert. Here is someone coming in with a mask, which is a mobile, interactive art form, and suddenly she's seen in front of all those European paintings that are happy being static and never moving on those walls. And the dynamic of that just set the show off, as did collaborations. We were able to have Brendan Fernandez come in. He's a Kenyan-Canadian, and he worked with local artists Etienne Capco and an English fashion designer who came up with a new version of a costume for Etienne, but Etienne said it was his first chance to do something he'd always wanted to do, which was to give a voice to all these masks that are forced to sit day after day and have people come up and look at them. So he enacted a wonderful process of kind of clearing the spiritual realm around all those masks with his own actions. We did our tech duty. We had 3D masks made. They were placed at the conclusion to the exhibition, and you could touch them, you could kind of stand around them, you could have your, of course, ubiquitous selfie taken. and there were a lot of selfies taken. Our PR office was counting on this to get a bit of a buzz out there, but the thing that really transformed the digital world for us was consulting with a post-human. I don't know if that hasn't been brought up in any discussions at this conference, and if you're at all interested in that, I'm happy to talk about it maybe during the questions. But we got a lot of advice about how to engage a different audience that's out there that is primarily looking at the internet. The website went viral when we posted part of this video. We actually had 300,000 hits in the course of 2 weeks. So being able to activate your audience through that kind of media exposure, I don't know if it was the post-human's advice, but it might have been. Sandra Perry is a phenomenal artist, and she just was here for 154, gave a wonderful talk. She also is someone who got our Jacob Lawrence Fellowship, so she'll be doing an exhibition at the museum soon. The best interactions were those that took longer, and one of those was having Sai Wolff, who is an artist here in Brooklyn, who came and looked through our collection. Everything on view was up for her to respond to. She selected an unusual grouping of art to incorporate into something that took her 6 months to evolve, but it was a new manifestation of her species called the empathics. The empathics embody a sense of forecasting into the future, how those of us who are not empathic could learn from this species. And she, in Brooklyn, found masks that are kind of sold on the streets that are a varietal of the kind that we had in the museum. She remade them, she cast them with entire, as you can see, fully mannequined visitations. They were surrounded by a digital video animation, a soundtrack, a projection that comes down onto the floor that had many of our masks swimming in it. And then this became a site for live performance with meditators and dancers. Thankfully, this was the hit of the show in many regards, with press attention, visitor response. So I'm happy to say last month the museum acquired this commission. So tomorrow I get to meet with Saya and figure out how we're going to place it in the permanent collection with an idea of a new form of interaction with the empathics that can take a longer time to unload, as permanent collections allow us that time to sustain a relationship with our visitors. The other thing that happened when this show went on the road was that a lot of local artists started saying, hey, what about the local artists? You brought in 8 artists from all over the world, but what about our participation? Tendai Marare, our city is so invested in music as an art form, and he is a leading major musician. He coordinated a group that is an ongoing label called Chimurenga Renaissance, as well as Shabazz Palaces. If any of you want a tip for a group to really follow, they are quite remarkable, and they're on tour quite a bit. But Tendai has an aesthetic. He lives in a world where he is conscious of everything he wears, he listens to, he plays, he touches. So I invited him in and asked him how would he install his work in a place like the Seattle Art Museum. It began with his video, then he did an entire case devoted to the memory of his sister, who is a phenomenal singer who died tragically. And then he put together a sequence of jewelry, a sequence of costuming, and a sequence of musical instruments that he has designed and is in production with, references to his albums, and that notion of him as a Renaissance man then led to redoing a gallery devoted to African Renaissances in many different clusters that occur throughout the gallery. So this is the overall, but in each section, one of the things we decided to try doing was taking all those totally blank pedestals and putting images on the pedestals that relate to the original environment in which the art was seen in Africa. And at times, someone was just mentioning that it can get a bit horror vacui because there's a lot of density to these installations, but that's the aesthetic that they come out of. Then the last image here is just one of another of the clusters, and this is all art from a kingdom in Cameroon. And on the platform in front of it, we have a display that tells you about, it's not just kind of an abstract notion when you collect something of this significance, but that I've been writing to the king of this kingdom for several years, and he sent his grandson to convene with us about what to say about this collection. And all of this is kind of laid out, so you get this classical art, but you get a contemporary interpretation of it. And the ability to work with artists that came out of this Disguise project is something I just will advocate forever and ever. Thank you.
Thank you all. These were terrific. So I think we'll do a couple of questions amongst ourselves and then take some questions from the audience. I was curious if there were particular departments or individuals within your institution who became strong advocates for the projects that you were working on, and how you forged those relationships, and sort of how within an institution you kind of garnered support.
We worked very closely with our engagement team, and as part of a reorganization when we were closed, we folded marketing into our engagement department. So, and we all share an office space. So that's really helped us to develop a consistency across what we, the curators, are doing in the galleries, or what we think we want to do, having a conversation with engagement about that. That flows over into their programs, and also into our marketing efforts as well.
Obviously, education jumped into action with the Disguise exhibition in particular, and we had a night of Disguise and a sequence of performances that ran during the course of the exhibition. It got quite volatile and engaging for people who I think are always curious about who is behind the work, and being able to have many of the artists present. And many of the artists did very, very startling things for our audience, and no one's forgotten it.
I'll just mention, too, that we worked very closely with our Learning Innovation team, and as well, it was really gratifying to work so closely with our curator of African art, Jan Ludovic Curators, and our curator of Native American art, Jill Albergio, in helping develop these spaces. It was just part of a larger initiative that involved other curators and people, as well. But we had buy-in from also our PR team from the beginning, trying to position these stories for us in the media. So since we're co-moderating, it's like we're each going to ask a question. But so I want to ask the group. We spend a lot of money on special exhibitions within our institution. So I know, Pam, yours was more of a special exhibition, but thinking about your permanent collection installation as well, how do these fit in terms of institutional priorities? Some of yours were related to reinstallations, but do you see this kind of energy and prioritization in continuing to explore these new areas of display and interpretation with the permanent collection galleries? Diana and Scott, perhaps.
I think I would say that having the opportunity to have looked at the collection in the way we did, I think is dictating some of our special exhibitions in new and interesting ways. So having taken a pause really institution-wide to focus in that way has, I would say, clarified some priorities for us, and maybe offered some opportunities that are now kind of expressing themselves in special, the way we're approaching temporary or special exhibitions.
I think it's our wish to continue to focus on the permanent collection. I mean, it's certainly part of the strategic plan we're working on, but it is, for an institution our size, it is a real challenge not to be constantly beholden to the changing exhibition carousel. But we've committed ourselves to really rethinking that and what we're doing with our special exhibitions along the same lines, and how we can start to use our permanent collection to expand upon exhibitions that we may be generating or that may be coming from elsewhere.
I was surprised, and because you'd asked this question earlier, that I went back to the metrics of our audience research, and we do have a group called the Maury Group that does audience surveys as people are leaving, and it was revealed that in the museums last year, 68% of the audience said they were coming not for special exhibition, but they were coming to the museum as a whole, and yet I would say that nearly 90% of our marketing budget is for special exhibitions, and nearly 80% of the education programming is for special exhibitions. So there's something out of sync there, and the ability to work longer and with more sustained effort with consistent people in town is something that I know we're all kind of wishing we could do more about. Yeah.
Thanks. I think we're ready to take a few questions from the audience.
Or are you all exhausted?
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I'm Mindy Bisa at Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art. And you just asked the question about buy-in internally, and I thought that was a great response of, getting the American or the Native American art curator and African American art curator to buy in. And I think you mentioned focus groups. Can you just touch on how do you get buy-in from your communities as well, more so maybe than internally? Thanks.
So I think that's a good question. I think with those particular departments, we know that there's diplomacy involved there as well, and we already have a Native American community that Jill consults with. So she already had a group that she could bring in to these focus groups for us. So that community was already cultivated. We didn't have quite a deep pool for the African and African American community, but we did have some folks that we were able to bring in. But I think just the fact that our curators had been trying to build relationships within that community already really did help us with the limited focus groups that we did. We did more with Native American just because we had more people that were willing to participate, frankly. And even though we tried to do some more with the African and African American communities out in the community so that they didn't have to come to the museum, it was still hard for us to get participation, I think, just because of, I don't know, perhaps the scheduling that we had. I don't know, we're not exactly sure, but so that was something that was challenging for us. But I think, we did get the NEA grant. We are planning to do some measurements, as we go along. So we hope to be able to go back to those communities and also work with them programmatically. I mean, I would really like to get them in and, have them have conversations and programs around the rooms. They'll be up for at least a year. So, we've got some time to work all of that out.
Thank you. And
Thanks.
it's a little harder when you don't have the resource of a Native American curator on your staff or of an African curator on your staff. And so it's just kind of an interesting conversation and challenge when the collections, you kind of have to go outside of your collection and community. So I'm always curious how other people are doing it. Thank you.
Hi, I also came from downstairs. I'm from upstairs. I'm Catherine Gunch at the MFA Boston. I have a question for you. I was really excited about this panel and curious about how it works, and I have a practical question. I feel like I spent a lot of time in school understanding printed sources and weighing sources as I do research and understanding oral history because I'm an Africanist, but I have a harder time understanding where to gain the skills to do community outreach, and I found that a lot of the communities I meet with around town think it's nice that I'm asking, and it's super great, but it's not really their focus, and they're not that interested. It could be a lack of charm on my part, but I wonder if you could give some thoughts about how you selected community partners, how you found them, how you're making these sustained conversations, and how long it took. Is it something that takes you a couple years in a community to do? What's a good time frame to expect those relationships to really gel?
Sure. We started probably a year in advance with the exhibition, and we have a list of community partners, and we do an open forum, invite them all in, and they get to hear what the exhibition is about, and then start proposing programs. And so all over the city, programs dovetail with what the exhibition is, and or they come in and they give us feedback about what we're doing that they're not quite sure about. Nobody bit on that idea of the post-human, but there are post-human communities, i.e. Seattle's very tech-oriented, and we do have vast number of people who are extremely involved with gaming and with online identities, avatars, and being able to kind of interact playfully initially and then get deeper with them has been something that's been kind of amazing to witness over the last few years. I advocate it because they really communicate.
I just want to mention, I don't work with these advisory groups directly, but I'd be happy to put you in touch with with Jan Ludwig or Jill. I know that, the Native American Advisory Group has existed for many, many years, and that's been really important to that department. It's been a little bit different with African because we have the largest Somali community outside of Somalia, so we've been trying to build relationships with the East African community. This was a West African project, so it was a little bit different. We weren't trying to be so defined with the focus groups, but I know Jan Ludovic has been working quite a bit with the different African communities, so I'd be happy to, if you'd like to talk afterwards, I can put you in touch with them.
Everyone's just drained. Yeah. We didn't have cappuccinos after lunch. No, that's wrong. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Maria Safiotti Deo from the Chazen Museum of Art at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Sorry, I'm a little bit dry. Thank you very much for a wonderful panel. We are searching for a new director, so I'm very interested in the whole issue of institutional priority and how to ask candidates who will come to campus, how they will engage in that. Do you have any recommendations? I know some things I would like to ask, but do you have any advice in terms of pointed questions or sort of request for a sense of how a new director candidate would answer or would approach this kind of issue?
We're looking for one too. And I was on the search committee for the last one. I think from that experience, what that taught me is, to hopefully you have a strategic plan to really focus on where you want to go and find the person that can help you get there. I've worked for a number of directors now over many years, and I think that creates the greatest chance for success. That seems obvious, but I think the problem with the search committee is that oftentimes it's board members who kind of may know about your strategic plan. They may have voted on it, but really to get them thinking that way too. Where do they want to see the institution go, and finding someone who can take you in that direction.
Yeah, I would echo that, looking to the strategic plan particularly also, because we simultaneously, with the reinstallation, we're also looking again at our strategic planning process, and we're extremely deliberate about language that placed collections as a priority for the institution across the board. And that was something that came, luckily, from my director down as a real priority. But if it's something that is already kind of written into the language of the institution, I would urge you to ensure that candidates are kind of looking at that carefully and ask them strategically about what they make of that.
Great, thank you.
And I'll third that because really we have a prong of our strategic plan that is engaging community. I know you're kind of embedded within the campus there in Madison, but we're a giant Beaux-Arts building like this one, and trying to make ourselves more welcome, especially within our very diverse community that includes Latino population, Somali population, and so that's been a real focus for us, and so we see this as a part of that. So yeah, if you can use that as a tool, I think that really does help. And if the staff has helped to craft it, then whoever you're bringing in should be also buying into that as well.
Great. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Anna. I'm at the Indianapolis Museum of Art, and I hope I'm not the only person in the room wondering what post-human is.
So really, how many people have never heard of post-human? Gosh, my gosh. Well, okay, I can describe the meeting. My first meeting with this person was a young man who arrived, and the communications and marketing staff assembled, and he didn't speak, but his avatar spoke on screen and answered questions. And so he was advocating and talking about how many people of his generation are identifying fully with their avatars, and that their avatar has a different kind of intelligence than they do when they're responding face to face. And so we worked with him over the course of a couple of weeks, and he gave us incredible feedback about how do you approach an audience that has this tendency to want to react in a very different way to the marketing that's going out from the museum. And they can deduce from the way that you're presenting whether you're looking ahead towards future forms of communication. So something like that Sandra Perry video, which is an entire swirling apparition, is obviously an artist who's very adept at digital media, but it has this undefined element. And when we posted it, his recommendation was you don't categorize it, you don't even identify it in the normal way. It has to appear as a surprise vision. And so we learned a lot listening to him, and it is something that I think is growing with who's heard of singularity? So the singularity that is emerging, and discussions about that with people who are saying, what is going to happen when, it's when human intelligence is overtaken by artificial intelligence, and the merging of the two. And so that is something that is spoken about at least in Seattle. I'm not. Okay.
It maybe hasn't hit the Midwest yet.
Anyway, look it up. There is actually a university of the singularity. It's an offshoot of Stanford. Yeah.
I'm just being mindful of our time, so I wonder, where's Judith? Oh, should we wrap it up? Okay. That sounds like a perfect subject to go have a drink over after this session. So thank you all for staying. Diana and I both appreciate it.
We really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
For all of us.